So
At your leisure.
Jonathan, you're all set? So,
what's his reaction? Because his kids are little.
yeah.
Waiting. Shortest attention ever.
Thank you very much. All right, if we may have everyone's attention. So this October 8, 2025 quarterly in-person meeting of the Connecticut State Elections Enforcement Commission is called to order. My name is Steve Penny, I chair the commission. No further opening is required since we're here live. I will ask the other commissioners who are also live to introduce themselves at this time, if they would, please.
Greg Pietzu.
Shannon Berquist?
Sonia Morello, sorry.
Claire Kindle, Interim Executive Director and General Counsel.
Thank you very much. And Interim Executive Director and General Counsel, you're on.
Thank you very much. About 6 months ago, I was hired as the interim to head up the agency after the retirement of the former Executive Director and General Counsel. And on day 2 of my time, I was testifying before the state legislature. And as we had a pretty robust legislative session, I promised them that I would provide an interim report for my tenure as interim director. My hours on my 120-day contract are going to be up by Veterans Day. And so I thought this might be the best opportunity for me to present what has happened in the past 6 months and what is likely to face the agency in the next 12. So we're doing a 6-month look back of what the agency status was when I walked in and what it is today. A look ahead of the challenges facing the agency and recommendations and some concluding thoughts. And for the 6-month look back, I've broken it out into the enforcement unit, post-election reviews. Both of those units have sort of very numeric goals. Working with the public, which actually involves all of the units in the agency. The auditors of the public accounts report, which was pending when I walked in and went final while I was here. Challenges on staffing, and the 2025 legislative session, which ended up with a passage of Public Act 25-26, which is going to require, and we are in the midst of, completely retooling how the CEP grant application process goes. Next page, please. But let's start back on the 6-month look back with respect to enforcement cases. And the stats, I hope you can see there's a lot of them. The backlog of cases has been cut almost in half, from 219 to 132. The open older cases filed before 2024, have also been cut by more than 60%, from 110 to 39. Open cases that were filed in 2024 have been cut by more than 50%, from 142 open cases to 60. 68 of the cases filed in 2024 have been completed or referred for criminal prosecution. In March of 2025, in the 12 months prior to that time, 5 cases lapsed because we missed the statute of limitations, the 1 year to deal with a case. Since then, not a single case has lapsed. When I walked in, there were 7 cases filed in 2025. And so far, as of the report, 79 were filed, of which 38% are already closed or referred, and 49 remain open. Going to the next slide, please. In March of 2025, there were 60 total post-election review enforcement cases, and 49 of them were from the 2020 election, so almost 5 years prior. Currently, 33 post-election review enforcement cases are open, and only 25, or half, from the 2020 so we've resolved about half of the 2020s, and we are making the resolution of the 2020 election audit cases as a priority. For the 22 election, there were 16 audit referrals. 6 are only open now. And for the 24 election, there were no enforcement cases. We have 2 open ones now. We're likely to have 9 more because we have 9 committees that have not given us a single piece of paper. And so we're going to likely have, that will be coming before the commission in the next session or 2. So for the enforcement unit, the enforcement staff has done a remarkable job. They have cut the backlog in half. They have targeted old cases. They have, and I will say that the enforcement unit did not act alone. They had a substantial amount of help from other units, particularly from compliance as well as audit. And that none of these units are working alone, but this is really a staff accomplishment and a remarkable staff accomplishment. It'd be easy for me to say it was me, but it wasn't. I simply made cleared the deck so that they could do their jobs, and they did it brilliantly. Turning to post-election reviews, which are also known as audits. In March of 2025, for the 2022 election, about 30% were done. 52 audits were completed.
Let's go 2 slides.
Switch slide, please. I'm sorry. Then that was the summary of it. One more. Thank you. Okay, so we're now on to the next. Dealing with audits and post-election reviews. So 52 were complete, 30%. We are now, from the 2022 election, I have 133 that are complete, or 74%, more than double. At the time in March, about 14% had drafts completed and 54 were still being reviewed. As of today, all drafts are complete. A substantial number are at final review, and between 7 and 9 are likely to be for enforcement. Next slide, please. For the 2024 election, the time to file hadn't closed when I walked in. It closed at July 1, so not every 2024 campaign had closed yet. So none were completed, and 56 committees had not yet terminated. Of the 108 that had terminated, none were final, and about 17 drafts were about to be sent out, and everything else was in process. As of today, the audit unit has completed 36% of the 2024 audits. 38 drafts are sent out. 9 committees have failed to provide any documents since they're likely to get referred. And the remaining 58, or 35%, are in the review process. In other words, a few months after the July 1 termination deadline, 35% are remaining in review. Everything else is done for the 2024 election. Next slide. For both the 2022 election and the 2024 election, we anticipate that all the reviews will be completed by this calendar end. Either it will be sent to enforcement, or you will have signed off on a final audit review. And that, again, a lot of hard work on part of the audit unit, a lot of focus. They really produced it. They sat down and they chugged through it, and I don't take credit for it. That was entirely the unit. They managed, they pulled it together and they put it out. Next slide, please. Working with the public. The agency, now this is a the working with the public is pretty much, in many ways, every unit of the agency. The agency handled, and particularly here, this is the compliance unit, handled over 14,000 filings between 675 and 730 committees related to quarterly campaign finance reports, terminations, registrations, and special elections. The agency as a whole delivered 12 in-person or Teams trainings, and we are one of the very few state agencies that actually have somebody who answers the phone, not machines. And so the compliance unit, the past 6 months has responded to 1,919 campaign calls, from areas of the public. And IT has responded to over 460 calls regarding ECRIS. And so IT does substantial amount of public outreach and availability to maintain the ECRIS system. Next slide, please. When I walked in, the auditors of public accounts findings were in draft. They did not change from the draft to the final. So that provided us the opportunity to address findings in that report before they went final, and so most of the issues were dealt with before they went final. That said, there were 4 filings that were new and 4 that were repeat findings. The first and foremost was untimely post-election reviews. We probably will get the same one because of where the look back an audit does, that the auditors do. But we are well on our way of fixing that problem. We will, by the end of this calendar year, have both 22 and 24 election reviews done. The legislature has changed the number of reviews from 50% to 20%. But what we did was we overhauled the review process and the format. And so for the 22 election, the format is the old format because we were halfway through and we really couldn't change it halfway through. For the 24 post-election reviews are in a very different format. We aimed to be much more user-friendly, much more direct about what the issues were, what was missing, and what was done right. And so we feel pretty comfortable that the new process is going to mean there will be no problems whatsoever meeting deadlines in the future. We expect that would be the case for the election. The other repeat finding that was troublesome was that failure to file required legislative reports. And when you're busy putting out brush fires, it's pretty hard to find time to take this time set aside and say, okay, now let me report to the legislature. And we have a wide number of reports required. I mean, every time the legislature turns around, they say, oh, and you can report on this or that. Well, we have filed all but one missing report. The last report is well on its way. It's 80% done. It's just a matter of finalizing it. And again, as with post-election reviews for the legislative reports, I have to give full credit to Josh Foley, who's taking the laboring order on that, and has made that happen. And so we are at this point caught up, with one exception, with our legislative reports, and we don't anticipate a problem in the future. We're just putting it on the calendar and making it a priority. The other finding was the lack of overtime and comp time documentation. That's actually fairly common in state agencies. But all I can tell you is I do nothing every day but sign comp time and overtime and CORs. I do an awful lot of personnel paperwork. Next slide, please. The other repeat finding, which is a major one, is the lack of a Seec-specific employee handbook. And the response typically had been, we don't need one, we just follow the general rules. Well, that's not true. There are very specific statutory restrictions on Seec employees. And there are very strict policies that only apply to Seec employees. And here I give credit to Charla Vincent, who helped do the first draft of the Seec-specific handbook, but we issued that in June. And it's the first time they've had one, and I think it's just going through the process, I think was good for the agency as well as for management to know what are the rules, and everybody needs to know them. And so that was good. The other findings were sort of one-times and were immediately addressed, and so we don't anticipate any of those being repeated. Next slide, please. In March of 25, we had multiple staff vacancies. We still have those vacancies. We have 25% of the agency our positions are open. So we need to fill those. We're in the process of filling them now. We've already made an offer to the staff attorney's position, and that is filled. We're in the midst, right in the middle of the interviews for the IT positions and the EA position. The new EO position the process is just closed, and we're waiting for the certified list. And obviously, you guys are well on the way of filling out the position program. We didn't have any clerical positions. So everybody's doing their own clerical, and in many ways, we're struggling with it. So we took one position and turned it to an AA position, into an administrative assistant position. And frankly, if I could get a second position as for a clerical, I would do it. I think that it just helps the agency runs more smoothly. You have seen the old and the new org charts, and I meant to put those up. But the lopsided reporting structure when I walked in was ridiculous. 37% of the agency was directly reporting to the executive director, which is just insane. All right, but it's just insane. And that has continued, I must say. Your interim executive director says grumpily that it has, we have this very lopsided reporting structure. I am very pleased to announce that DAS has allowed us to recreate the position of Director of Enforcement. We are in the process of filling that position. It's not yet been filled, but the application period is closed and the paperwork is processing by DAS. But we now actually have what I would consider to be a rational reporting system. There's a head of each unit. The heads of each unit, 5 units, report to the executive director, plus Attorney Foley as a special assistant and the AA. Which is a much more rational system than what we currently have. And finally, employee reviews were not conducted in 2024, and under this contract, if they're not conducted by September 30th, they're not worth the paper they're written on. Apparently, some were conducted in March, I don't know, 2024. But this year, all the reviews were done on time. Some of them were done on the 30th, but they got done. And so we are very pleased by that. Next page, please. Morale is a hard thing to measure. But I would like to say that I think morale is improving. In May we celebrated 50 years of the agency and the 20 years for the CEP program. We have monthly all hands, all in days, which seems to be a big excuse to eat well. But it also provides us the opportunity to do some much needed training. They had not had an office summer gathering for, I guess, since the pandemic. This year we had a summer gathering in the office, and we will hold a holiday party. We also held the first ever office-wide ethics training, and in September we also trained on the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act. Next page, please. I came on board well after the 2024 grant application season, and I can't tell you what things need to improve or not improve. What I can tell you is that the legislative session was dominated by problems either perceived or real, and I can't opine either way on what happened with the 2024 grant applications. That said, and here I have to give entire credit to the compliance unit, we had an extremely busy 2025 legislative session, and the compliance unit was invaluable in helping provide testimony, responses, bill analyses. So the agency had made 3 legislative proposals, which became 6 bills, and they got passed out of committee, and not a single one was passed or called onto the floor. We monitored 123 other bills before 8 different committees, and we provided written and verbal testimony on 22 bills. I testified a couple of times. The biennial budget was looking to, we basically got fully funded, and we got new funding for an additional elections officer, bringing our total staff up to 36 FTEs. They planned to sweep about $650,000 out of our budget, and we managed to fight that back. Public Act number 2526 was passed, which makes substantial changes to how we operate and how we operate the CEP. However, we were able to talk to the governor's office ahead of time and alert them about the problem with the dependence of the agency on the ED, and with the governor's threatened veto, we successfully managed to get the executive director position portions of 2526 overturned, and have this commission retain control over the hiring and firing of the ED, which was an enormous accomplishment, truly. Next one. This should be familiar. This was presented to you guys earlier as far as all of the various details, but next one, please. So on July 9th, we presented an implementation plan for Public Act 25-26. And we have, at that point, had revised all the written training materials and identified what interpretive issues were for policy decisions, explored clarifying through regulations, declaratory rulings, and legislative proposals. We are currently in the process of revising the CEP grant application process. We held the lotteries in public, and only pulled 20% for post-election review. And we are solidifying the post-election review process used in 24 to use it in the future. Next one, please. And we've also live streamed our commission meetings on YouTube. We've inventoried the election officers get full credit. They inventoried every piece of agency guidance. We've released guidance for ongoing municipal contribution amounts, and we're proposing various lotteries. And, lottery timing, we need to deal with state contractors, we need to deal with refunds, with a lot of things to deal with. So that's where we've been in the past 6 months. Next one, please. There are a couple of themes that I propose that the agency should follow as we face the challenges ahead. Transparency and accountability, which I think needs to be kind of our buzzwords for how we operate as an agency. Modernization. There's a lot of areas in this agency that are pretty antiquated and hidebound and need to be updated. Staffing and maintaining relationships. We need to get fully staffed. We need to maintain a rational org chart. And we need to nurture and reinvigorate our relationship with our various partners outside the agency. And then we have a number of upcoming policy issues and regulations, declaratory rulings, and we want to ensure that we do everything possible to ensure that the commissioners are very much part of those policy discussions, because the issues are going to be large, they're going to be significant. Some of them are directed by the legislature, but I think some of them are also just how do we want to approach a particular problem in ways that are probably appropriate? How do you want us to go about it? And one of the things that we're going to be asking you is how can we best get your input? Obviously, we'll present regulations to you, we'll present declaratory rulings to you, but there are a lot of issues out there. They take some thought, struggling with them, and we really are going to need your input. Next slide, please. So with transparency, 12-month look ahead. Our challenge is that our regulations are outdated, and so we're updating and expanding them. We need to adapt the CEP for a changing world. So whether they're pilot programs, whether they're new interpretations or legal interpretations of existing rules, we need to make things very transparent and sort of update things. 25-year-olds don't have checkbooks. They just don't. And if we want 25-year-olds to be making contributions and participating in the elections process, we need to adjust what we're doing. Same thing with how do we deal with digital media, social media. That is where most of the money is going. How would we properly ensure that our money is being properly spent? And how do we measure that? And those are things we are taking a deep dive in right now, but have not come up with an answer yet. And will be things that'll be coming onto your plate. There's a general sense of feedback from the legislative session that the post-election review standards were unclear. And so we are going to publish in regulation what those standards are and what you need to keep for treasurers in very clear language and regulation. And we need better methods for engaging stakeholders. There's a little bit of an ivory tower feel here that you don't get a lot of input from the outside other than the biannual review of the CEP program about how treasurers like it or not. And we haven't done it yet, but I think we need public roundtables. We certainly have encouraged public comment. I think we need public roundtables. We need some way to tap into our stakeholders and see how they think things should be implemented. Internally, we need to continue to strengthen, the interactions between compliance, enforcement, audit, IT, fiscal. And we need to help with policy formation so that we can present it to you for a decision in a way that makes sense. And if there's an internal debate that we can't resolve, then we need to present it to you to figure that out, rather than having something delayed for years on end and then say, oh, by the way, now it's finally here. And so I would also, I would recommend that we, if we get stuck, we come to you. Say, give us a help. So that's, at this point, these issues like declaratory rulings, regulations, piece, but otherwise you're getting them in chunks, whether it's through an audit review or through an enforcement case. We want to help you and help us have clear policy lines. And I think that is, and have it transparent to the public. So I think that is a challenge for us. The UAPA gives us a couple of tools, but we want to make sure we're using those tools and have as much engagement as possible. Next one, please. Accountability. Again, enforcement and audits are the easiest that way because there are numbers you can count. So, obviously the challenge is we want to make sure we have timely completions of audits. We have streamlined the process. The lottery, we're going to adjust the lottery timing so that it captures as much time as possible for us to complete it. The goal is to make sure we make our deadlines, that we do audits on time in the way we need to. Clear policy directives. I've already just talked about that for a while. Timely completion of enforcement actions. There's also, with case management, there are cases that you do 80% of your cases in 20% of your time, and then there's that 20% that just eats up all your time. But we obviously have started, we started in the enforcement unit a priority system, so that, somebody who steps a foot within a 75-foot range is not at the same level as somebody who's stuffing a ballot box. And so we are prioritizing high risk, much more serious cases. But we are also making sure we're paying attention to our statute of limitations, as well as dealing with the older cases and getting them out of the way while not letting the new cases basically linger or stale. All of that sounds wonderful. It's not easy. And we have been very lucky that the agency as a whole has been willing to pitch in from all units to help meet those deadlines and to help out with the various cases. We just had a case of a lot of data crunching that the audit unit helped with data crunching. And we want to continue that kind of cooperative spirit to ensure that we meet our goals and stay accountable. In this case, when somebody files an enforcement case, they know they're going to get timely results. I don't think that happened necessarily in the past, but that's clearly what we want to have happen in the future. And PA 25-26 basically has required us to completely retool how we do grant application. And so in the next few months, you're going to get a lot of those kinds of questions. How are we going to do refunds? How are we going to deal with state contractors? Do we look for straw contributions? Some pretty big issues that were raised by this rehaul. And so I think that we're going to have a fair number of conversations about that, and we're going to need your help. Next one, please. organization. Our IT staff has been nothing but heroic. We are an IT forward agency. eCrist is our bread and butter, as well as all of the systems, internal and external. Without IT, the agency just stops. It is it's our foundation building blocks. And we seem to have trouble keeping people there. And we basically have 3 people who are, stretched way too thin, are being asked to do too much. We're filling the vacancies. We're in the midst of interviewing, and we have fantastic candidates. So we are beyond lucky. But we also don't have particularly good promotional ladders, and we don't have any backup. So if one of our IT people is in Europe on vacation, we had to call in and do some work because we couldn't get stuff done without it. There's a lot to have passwords. There's all kinds of single points of failure. So we are looking to obtain bid supports in an MOU. This is not a bids consolidation. This is an MOU. You can get out of MOUs. You can join or get out as you wish. But we're thinking we need to do it because we also need a database administrator. We don't have it. We don't have the position. We actually need help desk. Jonathan's been doing help desk work, but it's not really his job. But all 3 IT people who have pretty high level jobs are doing help desk work. It has a 24/7 help desk that we make use of. So there are, we need to update. eCrist needs to be updated. Our internal systems desperately need to be updated. We're dealing with how can we deal with credit card transactions, paying to the agency and not. There's just an awful lot of modernization issues that have not been addressed in the agency because the agency has just been struggling to keep going. I think we need to go paperless. I think that we need to be much more electronic. If an agency the size of DSS can go paperless, I don't see why an agency the size of 36 can't go paperless. And we need to update our work physical. We have 5 new employees coming in, and we don't have offices for all of them. So I have a call into, and I've asked for architectural drawings from DAS facilities so that we can actually make our conference room a real conference room and with doors. Right now it's kind of an open cube, which kind of defeats the point of a conference room. And take that open cube conference room and make that into 2 offices. But, we need to do some modernization and some housekeeping that hasn't been done. So that's the next step. Next slide, please. Here is your homework. You need to come up with a process to evaluate the executive director, probably on a calendar basis, because the executive director and general counsel is not regularly reviewed. There is in this presentation a lot of metrics you could use to measure the performance of the executive director and general counsel. The Office of State Ethics has a format that they use, and I have sent it to the chair, but I will happily send it to all of you. But it is something I think as a commission, we need to decide what the process is, what the inputs are, what the timing is, and then make it happen. There are lots of variations, but I think that that conversation has to start with you. I can make recommendations. I think that for the past 6 months I've been giving you reports about the operations and where things are. And you obviously can see from what you're deciding where things are policy-wise. But I think you need to decide what metrics you want to measure and how you want to go about that review. And so I am happy to help in any way, shape, or form. But just let me know. And obviously, there's a benefit to reviewing staff that is well beyond meeting the requirements of the contract. Every staff member should have the luxury and the ability to sit down with their supervisor much more often than once a year. But once a year, there should be a check-in to say, how's it going? Where have you been? Where do you want to go? when you miss those reviews, you think, oh, they're not important. Those conversations don't happen. Oh, well, we'll have them later. There's never time later. And so it's also, I think, one of the criteria I would put on the executive director is your staff being reviewed timely and effectively and honestly. And I think that would be one of the criteria I would recommend. There are single points of failure throughout the agency, i.e. our IT person on vacation in Amsterdam having to call in. And one of the challenges and recommendations is we need to create teams and safety nets for all the agency functions. And frankly, the managers and staff all need training. And I would recommend that we establish training goals and formalize training requirements. In some ways, it's easier for the attorneys because they have to do 12 hours of CLE, but I think we should formalize and offer a lot of in-house trainings, CLE requirements. But training shouldn't be limited to attorneys. I think everybody in the staff should have the opportunity and should be highly encouraged to go. Next slide, please. What 2526 and going through the legislative process for 2520 Public Act 2526 made clear is that this agency needs to work on its relationships. 2526 would have been a much better document if there had been a relationship of trust between this agency and the legislature. We also need to don't have a bad relationship with Secretary of State. We need to keep those conversations going and keep those cooperations going because as the two primary election enforcement agencies, that partnership is critical. Here before the town clerks and the registrars at their conventions, and I think those relationships are pretty good. Public interest groups came out for us when we were dealing with the independence of the agency, and they also helped sponsor our celebrations. But there are people we should just call when it's hi, we have a celebration. Can you help sponsor it? And obviously with our stakeholders, the campaign committees, the independent committees, General Assembly candidates, statewide candidates, we're all going to see them in 26. And we want to make sure that our public outreach is positive and those relationships are maintained. Finally, the next two slides, the first slide and then the second, are really this is what are sort of my checklist of what's coming up. These are upcoming policy issues, and they are tough ones. How do you handle a state contractor ban when no one is required to confirm that someone's a state contractor? What do you do with straw contributions? If we're supposed to rely on the contribution card, we're supposed to sue a contributor for lying on the card. Is that going to have a very chilling effect on campaigns? There's some pretty big and thorny policy issues raised by this. And so, how are we going to deal with campaign general contractors or campaign in the box? How are we going to deal with social media, how it gets paid for? There are many, many issues, and these are really, and if you want to go to the next one, the next one is sort of what we're proposing for regulations and declaratory rulings. But, those are upcoming and in process. And they're big challenges, but fortunately we have a great staff. Next one, please. 50 years, one mission. There are elections, clean finance. And the staff has really performed. So if you go to the last one, please. So these are my concluding thoughts, sort of a little checklist of where we are and where we need to be. And, I will say on a personal note, when I showed up on March 21st, I really thought, okay, this will be temporary. It'll keep me something to do for the spring. And I never thought I would fall in love with the staff, the work, or the mission. And I have fallen in love with all three. And so it's a great agency. You guys are a tremendous commission. It's so great to have a engaged commission. And the staff with just a little bit of direction forward. And, can't thank you enough for the opportunity. Any questions?
First for the interim director.
I just want to say thank you for such a robust presentation. I think this is exactly the type of work that we should see on an annual basis. You talk about doing some type of review. This is the type of thing that helpful to me starting and any future commissioner, but to have a snapshot of what's happening and recommendations. The one question I have related to the recommendations you have. As the staff, were they able to give input as to what their thoughts were or opportunities as well? Meaning, in your reviews, that you incorporate some feedback into the recommendations for future stakeholders?
I shared this particular PowerPoint with all senior leadership and asked for feedback. And so when I was
This would incorporate kind of generally across the board what IT may have thought may have opportunity or do you see there's an opportunity for us as commissioners to also see them to see what they think?
I think that I think some one-on-one time with various sections is a very good idea. I think that, senior leadership, but I mean, I think it'd be helpful for commissioners to get a sense from, compliance and from all the units. I mean, obviously, the position that I'm in is the one that's responsible to you, but I'm not stopping communication otherwise, and I would love to.
It's very robust. I do this on a quarterly basis and for my own role, and this is the type of information that I definitely have this as part of the role.
What else? Yeah, I'm sure the rest of us, and Sonia, in those remarks, that's a lot of work. Some direction to go.
Agency staff has been nothing short of amazing.
My comment, I am not diplomatic at times, so I'm trying to be diplomatic, is, I think, challenge for the 5 commissioners is stakeholders making sure the agency's working. And I think part of that is us having a role in doing this sort of thing. We started about a year ago, focusing on the administrative side. A lot of the challenges that have been identified in the last year, I don't think we collectively knew about. I don't think we collectively put a lot of time and effort into fixing. My head has been in my hands half of this presentation because at every turn it just dawns on me how much work commissioners have to do to help put these processes back in place. We've seen what happens when there's a vacuum at the top. I don't have any specific questions today. What I do know is that it opens up a bunch of additional thoughts that I'm going to have, and I think the commission as a whole is going to have, in terms of fixing some of those top leadership issues. I want to reemphasize for everybody's coming to work, working hard. I've never tried to impugn the folks that are doing the hard work in the trenches. Important hard work. But it's challenging when there's not leadership in the right directions, not common messaging. And I think the 5 commissioners ultimately have a responsibility to make sure the trains are running on time and the ship's going in the right direction and all those youth. There's a lot for the 5 of us that we have to figure out how to fix some of this stuff. There's a lot here. This isn't like what staff needs. A lot of this, and I'm talking to my colleagues, is we need to re-engage on a bunch of levels here.
Mr. Piazza, I'd say there's a lot of single points of failure in any small agency. But I think what there's first step to do is to obviously pick an executive director, but also hold that executive director accountable. I think that is I think that if an awful lot of benefit from that, whether it is maintaining the reports that are currently being offered or asking for this kind of report on an annual basis. I think that will go a long way to addressing your concerns.
But there's been no accountability, and I don't frankly think that we are tooled. I'm not an HR guy. I'm a lawyer. I'm not a CEO. I don't have an MBA. So, but my point is, yes, we collectively need to learn how to exercise oversight, have annual reviews of the executive director, whatever that will be, have metrics, but not everything's a number. Right? Certain things are, maybe we need to sit down with senior staff without the executive director and talk to them one-on-one. How are things going? What are the, whatever. But five of us, none of us are going to be here forever. So I've always said from the get-go, I'm not interested in me. I'm interested in getting processes in place so that the next person is walking in to a system that's working. Say, yeah, you need to have an effective process to review the executive director. I agree. I don't know how to do that. And that's part of the challenge that talk about staff weren't getting reviews because things are busy, and I agree, and that's the same thing that happens with the commissioners. We were not reviewing the executive director. And, maybe we should do a review. Okay, but how are you going to do the review? What are the metrics? What are the goals and objectives that have been given to the executive director? How do you effectively gauge the performance over the prior year as to whether or not those things have been met? We don't have that in place right now. We have a lot more in terms of guidance, in terms of what we need to do to put that in place going forward. We had absolutely nothing a year ago, like nothing. We at least are starting this conversation, but I think the number one challenge as we go forward with the new executive director, all of these challenges that are finally being put in front of us, hey, these are the policy and organizational and administrative issues facing the agency. Now the tough work's on the commissioners to engage, figure out, okay, what are the goals and objectives we're going to set, and how are we going to put a system in place to evaluate the effectiveness of that? That's not going to get solved today, but I'm just flagging that's something that we're going to need to figure out, because we can't go back to a process if someone's around for 13 years, no idea what's actually going on, and then somebody gets sick and it's like, oh God, what the hell's going on? That's all rhetorical, but feel free to respond.
If I may respond, I'm just going to comment. A lot of that direction that you're speaking of really should be coming to us from the state. But I'm curious, are they still looking at unionizing? Where's the state with the manager union? Because that would also really weigh in, because they would set parameters around what a performance evaluation and our role managing, not managing, but having oversight of the executive director. So that's a big piece, because they
It's not going to be an executive, it's going to be an EX.
That's what I'm curious. Well, are they still making the union? I don't remember. This was all starting when I was leaving.
There is a union for the managers that went in actually during the Malloy administration. But you guys can relax, because you can fire the executive director in a whim. You can fire the executive director for all reasons or no reasons, because Public Act 2526, actually Public Act 25-187, Section 226, allows you guys to fire the executive director because you don't like what she's wearing. So, given that, I think it's really going to be. I think it's going to be easier than you think. We have set up evaluation systems all over the state. There are ways to evaluate executive directors. There's a way to hold them. I'm hoping this presentation gives you a roadmap. And that's what was my intent, was to say, okay, here's a roadmap. There are, some cases are more difficult than others, so doing it strictly on the number of enforcement cases is probably not a good way to do it. some audits are more difficult. However, overall health of the organization, overall communications, overall guiding principles, and I would say guiding principles would be transparency, accountability, cooperation, modernization, maintaining relationships with the public and the legislature. That sort of kinds of things are, and I think, frankly, having the commissioners sit down with senior staff without the executive director once a year is probably a good idea as part of the evaluation process. And I think once you set up your systems, I think you will be a little bit more, comfortable with the idea of evaluating. And it's basically the past has happened. Let's move forward and see how we can make things better.
Yeah, just a footnote on Greg's comments. Greg knows because he and I have had this conversation. But I come from an experience in municipal government in which I worked with a general manager that had a nationwide relationship for how good he was. From that, I have always felt that the important thing that you do if you're sitting, as we are as commissioners, is you hire well the executive and you let them do their work. That, obviously, that approach did not work given what's happened in the last year or so. So I'm signing up for the fact that we have to engage in this process, and we have to do what we can to contribute to the success of the agency. As Greg himself said, we're starting from a lack of experience in this type of work, and so we're going to have to learn as we go along, as do the employees and the executive director hire, whoever that may be. So we have anything more to come before the commission at this time?
I want to say great work to the team, because I think you did a great job acknowledging that while you were interimly leading the agency, the work has to be done by
Absolutely.
acknowledging that. Definitely acknowledge all of it.
All right, so if there's nothing more, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Seconded.